Thank you to the American Philatelic Society for their support in the making of this video. For information on membership and APS services, visit stamps.org.
So I'm in a museum, an art museum, because in order for us to discuss how to store your stamp collection, I need you to first realize that there's not much of a difference between a museum and your personal stamp collection. Hear me out. You're a curator of a collection that is important to you. Postage stamps are works of art and postal history are historical artifacts. And perhaps you're looking to display them in a meaningful and appealing way to others or to yourself. Or maybe you're not looking to display them. Instead, you're looking to store them and preserve them. Either way, that's exactly what curators do in museums. And whether you work in a museum or you're a stamp collector such as myself, we have many of the same challenges to address. Things that can harm our collection. So before we talk about how to house your stamp collection, let's first make sure that we all know what the 10 agents of deterioration are. These are very real things that can harm your collection. Regardless if you're the curator of paintings, sports memorabilia, dinosaur bones, or stamps, you need to make sure that you know what these 10 agents are to make the appropriate arrangements for storing and protecting your collection. And I'm not making this stuff up. The Smithsonian National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. also lists these 10 agents of deterioration as something that their own curators need to factor into account when handling, storing, and displaying the thousands of stamps that they have in their museum. So in no particular order, let's take a look at what those 10 agents of deterioration are. The first one is probably the most obvious: physical force, human handling especially. Stamps can be bent or torn, mostly done by poor handling or by accident. So you'll want to prevent this by making sure that you handle your stamps carefully using tongs or tweezers, and by making sure that your storage system doesn't involve leaving the stamps lying around loosely or in difficult and tight places to access where trying to take the stamp out could unintentionally damage it. The second one to consider is curator neglect. Neglect in the sense that you could lose or lose track of stamps in your own collection. You could have thousands of stamps, and the ones of value to you could easily get misplaced or stored alongside other stamps that make their way to somewhere else in your collection and you lose track of them. This is why it's important to have some kind of system in place behind the organization and storage of your collection. And it might also be a good idea to have some kind of records keeping track of where your stamps are. Light is of course a big one. It ultimately leads to fading. Whether it's artificial or natural light, overexposure to it is a big concern for museums. There's a reason why... No flash photography, please.
Whatever.
There's a reason why flash photography is banned from most art and history museums. The Smithsonian National Postal Museum apparently rotates its items that are on display for the very reason of light, periodically taking items off display and storing them in dark locations so they can preserve them for longer. For your collection, you'll want to make sure that your stamps are not directly exposed to light for extended periods of time. Fire is another agent of deterioration. It's a pretty destructive agent, but also smoke from fire can cause partial or total destruction. You may want to keep some of your more precious or valuable stamps and covers separate from your collection and store them in a fireproof safe, for example, where you keep other important documents. The opposite of fire, water, a common destroyer of stamps. Floods or leaks that cause direct exposure of water to your collection will damage it. So it's important to store your collection in a location that is less likely to experience any of those issues. Definitely my least favorite agent of deterioration: critters or pests, things that like to eat your collection or use it to nest in. And there are plenty of paper-loving pests out there. Rodents like to use paper to nest in. Silverfish will reap havoc on a collection of first aid covers. Why? Because paper is a starchy food source for some insects. So it's important to store your collection in a place that's less likely to be visited by critters or pests, and periodically inspect it to make sure there is no infestation. Pollutants are another agent of deterioration, and they can be natural or man-made. Gases, aerosols, bug sprays, furniture polish, and household detergents could make their way directly to your collection, or be sprayed in the nearby vicinity and latch onto your stamps and covers, ultimately causing them to decay over time. Pollutants could also be in the materials that you store your stamps in. There could be the chemical softeners in plastics or chemicals in adhesives and cardboards that will cause direct damage to your stamps, but we'll be sure to talk more about that in a little bit. The next two agents are somewhat related to each other: temperature and humidity. The climate that you store your stamps in will have an impact on the paper fibers, the inks, the gum, as well as the adhesives and bindings of your stamp albums. Also, humidity and water will encourage fungal growth, as well as the existence of other microorganisms that will damage your stamps. So it's recommended that you keep your stamps in a relatively stable environment between 18 to 22 degrees Celsius or 65 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and between humidity of 35 to 55 or 60%. And finally, the 10th agent to consider is theft and vandalism. A key concern for museums, of course, but also if you have stamps of value or perceived value. So if you do have stamps that you're not too keen on getting stolen, securing them in a safe or hidden in a secure location is how you would mitigate that risk. Okay, what just happened? The lights went out. Okay, there we go. It's back on. Anyway, so those are the 10 agents of deterioration. Know them and consider their risk towards your collection. I've put a number of helpful links in the video description that give you more details about the 10 agents of deterioration. Now, let's get out of here and discuss options for storing your stamps. Now that we are aware of the 10 agents of deterioration, think about where to store your stamps based on your current residence. You'll often hear that basements, attics, garages, and garden sheds are pretty bad locations to store your stamps. And that is mostly true. They tend to be the most prone to pests, sharp changes in climate, flooding, and so on. But it's not so much the name of the room that matters. It's wherever you're able to mitigate the risks of damage to your stamps from those 10 agents of deterioration. So a basement or attic could be fine if they're temperature controlled and void of any pests or risks of flooding, for instance. Now that's the where. Let's talk about how to store your stamps. And let me first show you an example of a bad way to store your stamps. Leaving them loosely in a box such as this is a terrible way to store your stamps. Just think of the damage caused from physical force when sifting through the box looking for stamps, even if you're using your tongs or tweezers. Stamps that are lying loosely in a box such as this are highly exposed to any changes in climate and humidity. They could stick to each other. The stamps are also highly exposed to light or other pollutants, and there's a great deal of curated neglect here. Also, this is a pest infestation waiting to happen. Since the walls are made out of edible cardboard, this could easily be an all-inclusive resort for a family of silverfish, for example. Now, if you plan on creating your own storage or albums using household stationery, be mindful of the pollutant agent. Things that will actually be in contact with your stamps could harm them. So all stationery needs to be chemically inert. Now, the big brands behind stamp storage accessories are pretty good at using chemically inert materials, but it's still a good idea to inspect the details before purchasing items. In general, make sure that any cardstock is acid-free, although it's really lignin-free that you're after. And when it comes to plastics, PET or polyester, polypropylene, and polyethylene terephthalate are the safe ones. If you see PVC, polyvinyl chloride, that is one of the worst, and there are plenty of products that use it. The chloride or chlorine could bleach your artifacts over time. Just keep that in mind. Now, what to actually put your stamps in really depends on the collector's needs and preferences, and also if the collector is looking to store these stamps and put them away for a rainy day, or display them in a manner that they or someone else can enjoy. So let's first cover some options for storing stamps, starting with glassine envelopes. When it comes to storage, glassine envelopes are the stamp collector's friend. Glassine is an inexpensive paper that has been produced in a way that is lightweight, translucent or opaque, but also air, water and grease resistant, as well as acid-free. And they come in a number of different sizes. Because of this, you can store one stamp, a block, or pack of used stamps and be able to see them at a single glance. And you can definitely use them to organize your stamps that have not yet been placed in an album. A lot of philatelists use markers to write on them, or pencil. Just don't write on it when a stamp's inside. You can easily indent the stamp with the marker or pencil. So write on it and then place the stamps inside. Or just to be safer, a lot of collectors apply labels instead, and they can reuse the glassine envelope by peeling off the label and placing a different one on them. They're also a great way to ship stamps. Actually, when ordering stamps in the mail from dealers and collectors, you may receive them in a glassine envelope that's been taped closed to prevent the stamps from falling out or humidity's ability to get to the stamps, and I tend to keep them when I receive them. But they're not a permanent solution for storage. Old glassine envelopes do discolor over time, so don't use a discolored glassine envelope, switch it out. And while it looks like parchment paper or wax paper, it's not. Glassine is a different type of paper. It's safe for storing stamps in, so make sure to use glassine. Dealer sales cards are really cool items. Although you'll typically not see collectors use them, they'll be used by dealers to store individual stamps. However, I like them a lot when it comes to organizing a lot of stamps and keeping them in storage. With lignin-free cardstock, safe plastic, and the print using non-smear ink, these are generally safe items to store stamps and save space. These allow dealers to keep track of thousands of stamps, and if you go to a stamp store or stamp show, you'll see dealers typically storing them in red or black boxes such as this one. They keep the dealer cards and even glassine envelopes stored upright in an easy to look through order, while sealing closed to prevent any light or other pollutants from getting to the stamps. Approval cards are great items as well. Cards that have one or multiple strips to slide stamps in and usually have an additional transparent flap to keep stamps protected. The rigid card provides support for the stamps while making it easy to handle and view them. Again, you may receive these in the mail when ordering stamps because it's a great way to keep a set of stamps together. These not only come in a range of different sizes, but also with a varying number of strips and strip sizes. Protective sheets are something to consider for postal stationery, covers, and postcards. They are transparent so that you can view the front and back of the items. And they of course come in a variety of sizes as well. You can also get them for full sheets of stamps. If you're keeping a number of full sheets together, it's a good idea to have them each in a protective cover. And then there are stock books, the ultimate storage facility or warehouse for the stamp collector. As in its name, it's a book for your stock. And stock books are meant to be used for the storage of stamps that are not on display. Traditionally, collectors would use stock books to store their duplicate stamps or stamps awaiting spaces in their albums. They typically come in black or white pages. I tend to favor the black pages because they really make the stamps stand out, and they can have clear plastic strips or glassine strips. And most of them will have an additional glassine or clear interleaf flap, either one between the pages or one per page. These are necessary as they protect stamps from being pressed against each other. I do find them irritating though because they do get in the way while I'm trying to work on my stamps, and if you're not careful while closing the stock book, you can end up folding them between the pages. Stock books also come in a variety of different sizes. You can get them small to large, as well as different page counts and strips per page, and you can get them in typical hardcover format or in a fancier padded leather with slipcase style. They also come in a very standard set of colors for some reason. Red, black, blue, and green. But I do have one with a more interesting design, for instance. So you can get them a little more fun style depending on what you're looking for. I'm actually using this one to store my stock of stamps that I'll be using for outgoing mail. I have no idea if other collectors or snail mail enthusiasts use stock books to store stamps in that they plan on using for outgoing mail, but in the snail mail world, when sending stamps to each other or letters to friends, it's always a good idea to have a number of stamps at your disposal to dress up the envelopes nicely. An alternative to stock books is using stock sheets. Just like a stock book page, these are pages with strips to store your stamps in. Stock pages solve a number of challenges that stock books pose. Depending on the ring configuration of the pages, you can select a binder of your choice to store the stamps in and not be constrained to the colors and styles of standard stock books. Another cool thing about them is that you can take them out the binder and place them flat on the table. This makes it a lot easier and less frustrating to work on your stamps. Another benefit is that you can move entire pages around in your album quite easily, and of course add pages as needed. Something to keep in mind is that these pages are not as supportive as a firm page in a stock book, so be mindful of that when storing in binders, because this can have an impact if the binder is likely to allow the page to bend. Also, depending on the pocket sizes, there could be more air circulation between the pages and potentially more light and access for pests. But the pocket sizes range, where the entirety of the stamp may be within a strip or the entire page is a pocket. Stock pages may come in black, double-sided, or also clear, and the pockets could hold covers as well as postcards, so postcard and cover collectors can absolutely use these as well. Now, I am especially a fan of album systems that use stock sheets. Album systems are offered by several of the brands that sell stamp equipment, in which the inserts, sheets, and binders are designed to the same size and level of quality so that you can continue purchasing additional materials belonging to the system, knowing what you are getting and that they are compatible. The Vario system by Lighthouse is a good example of an album system and a favorite of mine, along with a number of other collectors that I interact with. I particularly enjoy the clear sheets that allow me to organize covers and stamps together. I'm able to view the stamps from the front and back without removing them from the pockets, and you can store them in a binder of your choice or purchase a binder that comes with the system. And another thing that I like about these kinds of stock sheets is that you can store a number of non-stamp related items to go with your collection. Banknotes, checks, phone cards, documents, whatever helps to tell a particular story or is part of the history of those postal items that you're showcasing. Now hold up, I've been saying that stock books and stock sheets are to be used for stamp storage. However, I tend to organize, sort, and display my stamps using stock books as well. I love stock books and stock sheets. They allow for a tremendous level of flexibility to work with and sort stamps. I tend to organize and then reorganize my stamps as I'm exploring them. I need to be able to assemble stamps together, take them out to review them. Stock books are also compact yet user-friendly to show others in an ordered fashion. Personally, I tend to shy away from stamp albums because stock books and stock sheets meet my collecting needs. I also encourage new collectors to get started with stock books and stock sheets because it's a great way to figure out what your collecting interests are before committing to a topic, country, or style of collecting and displaying your stamps. Once you figure that out, then you can move over to a more specific stamp album. Now, we've already started to talk about the displaying of stamps using stock books and stock sheets as one method, but the true method of displaying stamps is the stamp album. Stamp albums are almost as old as the hobby itself. Albums became popular in the 1860s, mainly fixed-leaf type books with printed outlines that had the appropriate shape for the postage stamps that had been issued around the world. Illustrations of the stamps started to show up in albums in the 1870s, and this type of album has existed since then, although you won't find an album today that has a square for all the stamps that have ever been issued. But you can still find them, such as this one. This is a first stamp album for beginners and has a number of illustrated and blank spaces for placing stamps from countries around the world. The approach to placing stamps in an album such as this typically involved hinges. Usually made out of glassine, hinges are gummed on one side and then folded in half and moistened so that one part stuck to the top of the back of the stamp and the other to the page. They're very affordable and, if done correctly, allow you to display the stamp while being able to flip it over and view the back. Hinges, however, are a controversial topic in the hobby. While they may have a strong history as the go-to method for displaying stamps in an album, today they're known to devalue stamps, and that is because they do damage them. Removing a stamp from an album that has been hinged may leave it scarred. Also, you risk tearing the stamp. Now, you could use, of course, stamp lift fluid that is provided by stamp companies or another agent that can remove the stamp from the adhesive backing. But if the stamp was mint, it would ruin the gum. In the 1950s, there was a desire to not apply the stamps with hinges due to the wide price difference between hinged and unhinged stamps. When it comes to quality, MNH, or mint never hinged, is a sought-after trait. Mint stamps that haven't been hinged are more valuable than those that have been. These beautiful Graf Zeppelin stamps of mine are mint and very well scented. However, when you look at the back of the stamp, you can see the shape of where the hinge was once applied. So these stamps are likely to be of less value than stamps that were never hinged. So collectors today tend to steer away from directly hinging their stamps to albums, but I do hear from collectors that choose to hinge stamps that are used and of low value. It's an inexpensive way to display and store stamps, and there is a strong connection to stamp collecting, as hinges undoubtedly played a key role in the history of philately. Now, I may not have had an album such as this growing up, but many of you watching may have and still have a soft spot for this type of album. They were the backbone of the hobby and the reason for the incredible enthusiasm for stamp collecting. Collectors that had one of these albums were presented with a mission: fill in the squares to complete a country or a page, and learn a little geographic and historical trivia as you go. But you really need to complete the pages and fill in all the squares to truly be satisfied with your collection. These hunt and hinge type albums are what collectors carried into stamp stores, stamp clubs, the aisles of stamp shows in search of the missing stamps to complete a page. A gentleman by the name of Stuart Weitzman once had an album such as this as a child. His album had a blank square for the British Guiana 1 cent magenta, and I hear a lot of collectors complain and even laugh about having unattainable squares in their hunt and hinge albums, such as Stuart Weitzman's 1 cent magenta. They could even have an inverted Jenny, for example. Well, later in life, as a successful shoe designer, he purchased the 1 cent magenta for $9.5 million because of his childhood memory. So you can see that these hunt and hinge type albums are undoubtedly an important aspect behind the enthusiasm of the hobby. Mounts are a preferred method for attaching stamps to stamp albums. Known generically as Howard strips or Howard mounts, although Howard is a brand, the stamps slide into the mount and do not get damaged by any glue or direct contact with a hinge. These are of course a direct upgrade from the hinge, but they will be more expensive. You could purchase mounts to size or mount strips that you then cut to the appropriate width. If you are using mount strips, you'll need to make sure that you get the appropriate height to fit the stamp and invest in a mount cutter such as this, allowing you to make accurate and clean cuts. It's best to first apply the mount to the album page, let it dry, and then place the stamp inside the mount. You could also provide additional support if you're concerned about the stamps falling out of the mount by sealing the open end of the mount with a mount glue pen. Now, instead of using a book format such as this, you can of course assemble your own album using album pages, which is the preferred method for most collectors. Again, album pages come in a variety of formats. You could use graph paper album pages to assemble your collection any way you see fit, or blank heavy card album pages. These could also be pre-printed with squares for the specific stamps that you're collecting. You don't just have to be placing stamps on album pages, but you could also be placing postcards and covers using adhesive corner mounts. You could even print your own album pages. The APS, for instance, provides several free album pages for you to download and print on your own card stock. Or you could design your own pages, measure the stamps, and create templates in whatever software you are comfortable with. What's cool about this is that you could even assemble the stamps any way you would like, and then maybe even provide some details about those stamps and the collection that then gets printed on the page. I know several collectors who do a brilliant job of this. Remember, if you're using cardstock and inks, be mindful of the pollutants that they may contain. Are they acid and lignin free, and will the inks run, and so on. Now, you could also purchase hingeless albums and hingeless album pages. The mounts are already applied to the pages and just require you to insert the stamp. It removes a bit of the fun with stamp albums, but at the same time, they are one of the most safest ways to store your collection. It's really easy to damage a stamp during the hinging and mounting process. This helps to mitigate that risk, but these are quite expensive. As you can see, there's a number of options available for the collector to work with. This was just an introduction, so I encourage you to investigate further as to what a best fit for your collecting style is. Regardless of what you go with, make sure to inspect your collection regularly for any water damage, infestation, or discoloration. If you notice any of that, be sure to move your stamps to a fresh storage option, a new album page, a new stock book, or glassine envelope, for instance. As mentioned before, the video description consists of a number of helpful links that can help you learn more about stamp preservation, how to mount and hinge stamps, as well as links to suppliers who manufacture accessories and equipment such as this. As always, thanks for watching and happy exploring.